In 2004, Nokia built the iPhone. Not something like the iPhone. The iPhone. Full touchscreen, camera built in, connected to the internet. The whole thing. 3 years before Steve Jobs walked on stage and introduced it to the world as if no one had ever thought of it before. Nokia engineers built it in a lab in Finland. It worked. They brought it to management. Management said no. The production cost was too high. The market was not ready. Nokia's current phones were selling fine. The prototype went into a drawer. The engineers went back to their desks. 3 years later, Apple shipped the same idea. The world called it a revolution. Reporters described it as something that came out of nowhere. It did not come out of nowhere. That same year, 2004, Nokia engineers also proposed building an internal app marketplace. A place where outside developers could create software for Nokia phones, and users could download it directly to their device. Apple would later call theirs the App Store. It became one of the most profitable software platforms in human history. Nokia killed that idea too. Then, on January 9, 2007, Steve Jobs walked on stage in San Francisco, pulled a small rectangle out of his pocket, and said it was going to change everything. Across the Atlantic, Nokia's board heard those words. In Waterloo, Ontario, BlackBerry's co-CEO Mike Lazaridis watched it live. When it was over, he called his partner, Jim Balsillie. He said, "I want you to watch this. These guys are really, really good." Balsillie watched the full announcement. Then he said, "It's okay. We'll be fine." Both companies laughed at what they had just seen. Within 6 years, both were gone. You have probably seen the version of this story where two dominant companies got too comfortable and missed a trend. That version is not wrong, but it leaves out the part that actually explains what happened. Nokia did not miss the future. Nokia had a version of the future on a lab table in 2004 and chose not to build it. BlackBerry did not fail to recognize the iPhone as a threat. Lazaridis recognized it in the room. He said it out loud to his own partner. Then the two of them reasoned themselves out of acting on it. This is a story about what happens when the people who hold power stop listening to the people who hold information, and what it costs every single time that gap opens and no one closes it. To understand how far they fell, you have to see how completely they owned the world before the fall. Nokia was a Finnish company. Before phones, it made rubber boots, cables, and paper. In the 1980s, it turned toward electronics. By the mid-1990s, it had become the company every mobile phone manufacturer was measuring itself against. By 2007, Nokia held roughly 40% of all mobile phones sold globally. Their market value that year reached $116 billion. These were not just popular products. Nokia phones defined what people believed a phone should feel like and do. The Nokia 3310, the Nokia 1100. Phones built to survive almost anything. Phones sold in countries with no running water but solid Nokia signal. Across the Atlantic, BlackBerry owned a different corner of the same world. Research in motion. The Canadian company behind the BlackBerry had built the phone the business world ran on. Presidents used it. Senators carried it everywhere. Investment bankers would not travel without it. The physical keyboard was fast and reliable. The email encryption was industry grade. Government contracts requiring secure communication almost always went through a BlackBerry. In 2007, BlackBerry held more than 50% of the United States smartphone market. Its stock price sat above $230. Its co-CEOs were counted among the most influential technology executives alive. These were not companies watching a stronger rival from behind. These were the companies everyone else was trying to catch. But underneath that dominance, a shift had already started. And the people who felt it earliest were not the ones sitting in the boardrooms. Nokia's engineers had been watching what people actually did with their phones. People were taking photos, browsing websites, sending files. The device in people's pockets was becoming something larger than a communication tool. A small team began building a direct response to that shift. By 2004, they had a working prototype. They brought it upstairs. Management saw the production cost. Too high. Management saw the current sales numbers. Healthy. Management looked at the timeline and concluded the market was not ready. The prototype was shelved. What those engineers could not communicate loudly enough was a simple truth. The moment before the market understands what it wants is the only moment where you can position yourself to own what comes next. Nokia had that moment and walked away from it. Between 2002 and 2007, Nokia's engineering teams submitted more than 500 internal improvement proposals. New interface concepts, new software directions, documented ideas for where the phone could go next. According to internal accounts from that period, not one was implemented. Then January 9th, 2007 arrived. Jobs stood on that San Francisco stage and told the audience he was announcing three things: a widescreen iPod, a revolutionary mobile phone, a breakthrough internet device. Then he paused and said all three were the same product. The crowd understood immediately. Inside Nokia's Helsinki headquarters, engineers watching the stream went quiet. The next morning, a group of 9 Nokia engineers assembled a formal internal document. Their assessment was direct. Apple's approach could shift what every consumer expected from every phone in the market. Their recommendation was equally direct. Nokia needed to move to a full-touch interface immediately. Symbian, the operating system Nokia had built its product line around for years, needed to be either fully replaced or rebuilt from the ground up. The document reached leadership. Leadership read it. Nokia's official internal response classified the iPhone's effect on the company as minimal. Nothing changed. At BlackBerry, the reasoning ran on a different track, but arrived at the same destination. Lazaridis had felt something watching the job's announcement. He named it out loud to Balsillie. But within hours, the two men had worked through it. BlackBerry's customers were enterprise. The iPhone was consumer. BlackBerry's encryption was unmatched. The iPhone had no physical keyboard. The battery drained fast. It could not handle the security requirements of a corporate environment. COO Larry Conley delivered the formal company position. It wasn't a threat to RIM's core business. In February 2007, Balsillie told reporters, "It's kind of one more entrant into an already very busy space." Both companies went back to work. If this is the first time you are hearing about that 2004 Nokia prototype, you are not alone. Most people who know this story started in 2007 when the iPhone launched. The decisions that shaped the outcome were made years before that. Drop a comment and tell us, if Nokia had built and shipped that prototype in 2004, do you think the smartphone world looks the same today? We read every single comment and we always reply. Now, back to the story. Because what researchers found when they went inside Nokia after the collapse is the part that changes how you see everything that came before it. After Nokia fell, 2 business school professors decided to find out what had actually happened from the inside. They conducted 76 interviews across Nokia's own organization. Senior leadership, middle managers, engineers, outside partners who had worked directly with the company. What they found was not a company that had been blind to change. What they found was a company where fear had quietly replaced honest communication. And by the time the consequences arrived, the people at the top had no way of knowing it had happened. Middle managers inside Nokia had learned not to deliver bad news upward, not because of any formal instruction, because the culture had trained them over years to understand what happened to people who told leadership things it did not want to hear. So they stopped. When Nokia's software began falling behind Apple's, the reports traveling up to senior management described steady progress. When rebuilding Symbian proved harder than anyone had admitted, the internal updates were worded carefully enough to still sound optimistic. The warnings being spoken inside engineering rooms were reaching the boardroom as managed reassurances. Nokia's senior leaders were not ignoring a crisis they could see. According to the researchers, They genuinely believed the company was tracking well against Apple. The picture they received was different from the picture that existed, and no one in the middle was willing to be the one who changed that. The 9 engineers who filed their warning on January 10, 2007, were not a lone voice. They were one of several groups that had been saying similar things through similar documents for years. None of it arrived at the top intact. At BlackBerry, the failure took a different shape, but produced the same result. BlackBerry's leadership had built its entire framework for measuring success around the customers it already held. Enterprise accounts, government contracts, secure email subscriptions. Every metric tracked told the same story. Core business is holding. What those metrics could not register was what was forming on the other side of the market. The iPhone was not attacking BlackBerry's existing corporate customers first. It was building an entirely new population of smartphone users. People who had never needed a physical keyboard, never needed government-grade encryption, and now had a device that felt completely natural to use. By the time BlackBerry understood that those new users represented a structural market shift and not a consumer trend, that population had grown large enough to change the direction of everything. And the enterprise customers BlackBerry had always counted on were beginning to notice. By 2010, Nokia's smartphone market share had fallen from around 40% to 34%. The engineering teams that had been raising concerns about Symbian for years were now watching competitors ship major software updates in the time it took Nokia to revise a planning document. Android was spreading fast across manufacturers that could not match Apple on design, but could compete on price. The app ecosystem Nokia had chosen not to build was now the single most important factor in which phone a person chose to buy. February 11, 2011, Stephen Elop, Nokia's newly appointed CEO, sent a memo to every Nokia employee worldwide. He wrote about a man standing on a burning oil platform in the North Sea, flames spreading on all sides. 2 options left: jump into the freezing water and take the chance of survival, or stay on the platform and burn. He wrote, "We are standing on a burning platform." Nokia's CEO sent that memo to a company that had, in the previous calendar year, shipped more than 110 million Symbian phones, more units than Apple and Android produced between them, more handsets than any single competitor on Earth. Nokia was not finished when the CEO sent those words. But the fire had been burning for years before he arrived. The engineers had filed the warnings. The documents existed. The assessments had been written, filtered, softened, and absorbed quietly. Nothing had changed. 1 week after the memo, Nokia announced it was ending Symbian development and partnering with Microsoft to build future phones on Windows Phone. Engineers who had spent years pushing internally for an Android partnership sat in the audience and watched the announcement. Several left the hall before it ended. At BlackBerry, the company's answer to the market had already taken form in a product called the BlackBerry Storm, a full touchscreen phone positioned directly against the iPhone. The screen was built around a hinge mechanism that caused the entire display to physically click downward when pressed. Users returned it in large numbers. The software crashed repeatedly at launch. One BlackBerry engineer later described the storm as the moment the company's credibility with its most loyal customers first cracked. BlackBerry released updates. Each one repaired some problems and introduced others. By 2012, BlackBerry's United States smartphone market share had fallen from above 50% to under 5%. September 3, 2013. Nokia's CEO stood in front of the cameras. Nokia had agreed to sell its entire phone division to Microsoft for $7.2 billion. The company, valued at $116 billion in 2007, was selling the part of itself that had built its name for roughly 6 cents on every dollar of what it had once been worth. When the announcement was done, Nokia's CEO looked at the press. "We didn't do anything wrong," he said, "but somehow we lost." Then he wept. His management team wept with him. In Waterloo, Ontario, BlackBerry's fall moved more slowly but reached the same place. From 85 million subscribers at its peak to 23 million by 2016. From a stock price above $230 to single digits. By 2016, BlackBerry stopped making its own phones entirely. The keyboards were done. Nokia's CEO got one thing wrong that morning. They did do something wrong. Several things. And the record of most of those things was already sitting in their own files. But the deepest failure was not a single product decision or a missed software bet. The deepest failure was structural. Nokia built a culture where the truth got softer every time it moved upward, until the version reaching the boardroom no longer matched the version existing in the building below it. BlackBerry built a framework for measuring success that could not register the kind of threat forming outside its existing customer base, until that threat had already become the market. In both cases, the people at the top were not uninformed by accident. They were uninformed by the system they had built around themselves. Not a system anyone designed deliberately. One, the culture produced on its own, quietly, over years, until it was too late to see it clearly. That is the part the CEO's sentence missed. You cannot lose something you were never actually seeing. Nokia did not lose the phone market. Nokia lost the future of what a phone had already become. And they had a version of that future sitting on a lab table 3 years before anyone else touched it. The 76 interviews are on record. The 2004 prototype is documented. The January 10th internal assessment exists. If you want more stories like this one, told the way they actually happened, with the parts that were left out, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because there are a lot of things people think they already understand, and most of them are missing the part that actually matters.